Yes, we're going to go ahead and start with the assignment. So, welcome everyone to week 3, part 2. We're going to go over the assignment problems that we had from last time, and then move on maybe into a few other things here and there and whatnot, but at least we're going to talk about the assignment. The assignment, we weren't able to finish all of week 3, so we didn't give every single problem. We kind of jumped around a little bit, so for the first set here, we just did 1 through 5, so that's all that we'll cover right now. All right, and the first question was, how many meanings does any given word in any given language usually have? And what did you guys come up with?
More than one.
More than one. Did anyone come up with anything different?
Well, depending on the word, they can have.
It could have any specific number, but yeah, usually more than one at least is a safe way of putting it. Yeah, I completely agree. I would go with that. Yeah, more than one. That's pretty safe. Number 2, the statements, everyone open your books to page 300 is an example of what?
I said universal language. That's not right.
I like where you're going with it, but it doesn't quite capture an important part about it. It does have to do with universal language, but it's something that's happening with the universal language here. Because everyone is technically universal language, but would we believe that the person who is saying this actually means everyone in the universe?
No, it would just be those of us present.
Yeah, so it's universal language, but it's not being used in a universal way. And that's the important part that I'd be looking for on the answer of that one. Yes, it's universal language, but it's not being used universally. So it's an example of universal language that is not truly universal, something to that effect.
So a universal word that is not always universal.
Yeah, you could say that as long as you specified what word you're talking about.
Yes. Like everyone does not mean every.
Doesn't necessarily always mean everyone. In the whole wide world. Yeah, the people in China are not going to be opening up their books to page 300 anytime soon.
You probably don't have a 300 page.
Yeah.
Well, depending on the one. All right. Number 3 could be somewhat difficult depending on... I kind of feel like in the last lesson I didn't make that as clear as I could have, and so I apologize for that. But nonetheless, we'll see what people came up with. How do transliterations and traditionals differ from one another?
Well, I said transliteration is a word that is carried over from one language to another where the meaning has changed. But traditionals have been used for a long time, but nobody knows what their original meaning was. Yes, no?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite, yeah.
That's the same face he had last time.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with it. Like I said, I don't think I presented it as well as I could have. But let's give a more concrete example of a transliteration here. So I'll go ahead and type it out. See if I can highlight. It'll be down here at the bottom of the screen. You guys all know that word because that's the name of the course.
LOGOS.
Yeah, LOGOS. And that's in English characters. We use L, we use O, we use G, we use O, we use S, right? However, all of you guys also know that that is not an English word. I put it in English characters, but it's not an English word. That's a Greek word. That's what a transliteration is. You take another word from another language and you put it in the characters of your own. That's a transliteration. So it's you carry it over, but it doesn't actually mean anything in your own language. So you use your characters so that you can write it and pronounce it and all those kinds of things, but it doesn't actually have any meaning in your own. A traditional, on the other hand, is a word that actually did have a meaning in that language at one time, but it's either shifted with time or it's been lost with time. And a lot of words qualify, at least to one extent or another, as traditionals, because words just typically change in meaning over time anyways. But traditionals are important because it's the original meaning that's important. That's when you have a traditional. So the difference between the two is that transliterations never actually had a meaning in your language. Traditionals at one time did, but it's been lost. So that's the difference. Did it actually originally have a meaning in your language, or did it not?
So could you say with the traditionals it's been lost but or changed?
Yeah, lost or changed. Yeah. Yeah, but the big thing is that one actually meant something in the language, the other one never meant something in that language because it was never a part of that language.
Okay, so it never had a meaning in the receiving language.
Yeah, in the receptor language, it never actually had a meaning. Hello.
Hey, I'm just writing.
All right, so does that make more sense than last time?
Yes.
Okay, so we get that a transliteration is another language's word, but you put it in your own characters. Do we get that?
Okay, just a second.
Because that's kind of the important
Yeah.
part.
Okay, another.
Take a foreign word and put it into your own letters so you can pronounce it.
Exactly.
But that doesn't have any meaning in your language.
You know, it's another language's word. Taco is not an English word. It's a Spanish word. Quesadilla, it's their word. Yeah, but we often write it out in our characters so that we can say it and we can put it on the menu and you can point at it and say, I want that.
Or they have pictures, you can point to that picture.
The pictures are great, right? That looks good. Exactly.
Okay, I'm not going to answer these.
Okay, so.
You're fine.
Okay, another language's word.
Yeah, transliteration is another language's word that you've decided to spell out using your own characters.
We have no word for that.
Are we on question number 4?
We are on question number 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We were killing time before you arrived, so you're good.
Oh, good, thank you.
But we did give up on you.
I know, sorry. I knew I was gonna be pushing it, and anyways.
You're fine. Life happens. As we've been discussing actually a lot.
Back up a little bit and let her get the, you can tell her the answer.
Yeah.
How about you just give me the answer?
There you go, right?
I
Yeah.
have them written down.
Okay, so on number 1, how many meanings does any given word in any language usually have? Kind of a trick question. As long as you said more than 1, you're okay. If you came out and you specifically said, it always is going to be 7, you would be wrong.
Well, I also have no idea how I would have come up with that, but you know.
I got a dictionary from every single languages, added up, found the average. It's on average, it's now. That doesn't work. More than 1 was the right answer. And then the statement, everyone open up your books to page 300, is an example of what? Universal language that is not actually truly universal. Something to that effect.
Okay, I answered that one wrong.
Yeah, because it's very unlikely that if you say that the people over in China are going to open up their books to page 300. No, not quite universal.
Like we discussed last week, like all doesn't necessarily mean all.
Right, I caught that on the recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody open up your books.
Yeah,
Could
all who are
mean.
present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Context is a big thing.
A group all, not everybody in the whole world all.
Right.
Yeah. And then, like we said with translations and traditionals, what's the difference? Transliterations never meant anything in the receptor language. Traditionals, at least at one time, did.
Oh, that was number 3's answer.
Yeah, that was number 3's answers. Transliterations never meant anything in the receiving language. Traditionals at one time did. And I really didn't make that as clear as I could have last week, so I apologize for that. It's a good thing that this is not something that the State Board of Education is going to be looking at.
Oh, you're excused, believe me.
Thank you.
We've all had
Well,
lessons.
nobody
but
said
we don't
anything
say
up here
well.
to, get you off the hook.
Yeah.
All right, and then number 4 was a little bit more in depth. Why might you want to be cautious about using transliterations or traditionals? What'd you guys come up with that? Because there's a few different answers you could put down for that one that would be appropriate.
It can confuse or misguide the reader.
Yeah, that would be a fair enough point. That's a pretty general one. That's hard to argue with. Did anyone do anything that was more specific?
I have like 4 lines of explanation.
Woo.
Overachiever.
Hold on. I have something for you. Here you go.
Oh my gosh.
I have to give that to myself often.
For those of you who are listening online, we just had an exchange of gold stars. Actually, it was interesting. I polled people this week for online usage and found out that we have about twice as many people listening online as we do in class. So that is actually kind of cool. All right, and then,
Do you want me to?
yeah.
Okay.
Say what you say.
Okay,
Let's see what you got.
And I could be wrong. So it says we need to be cautious when using transliterations and traditionals because they obscure the original meanings of terms, and they do not reflect the range of usage in terms, especially underlying terms.
Okay, that is not wrong. That's pretty much copying the notes word for word, though.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that's not wrong.
And I said everybody uses them differently and has a different meaning in their mind when they're saying the word.
That is a very big problem with transliterations and traditionals, is because the original referent is usually either wasn't there with transliterations or traditionals, it's been lost. So yeah, people are very arbitrary about them. Yeah, I would agree that that is a major problem.
Okay, so it can become very arbitrary?
Say what?
So it can become very arbitrary?
It can be arbitrary just in that the original reference isn't there for most people. We all think that we know what it means, but we don't actually know. But we think that we do, and that's the dangerous part.
Perception. It's all about perception.
Because we don't know the original, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever you've lost sight of the original meaning, you're opening up the doors to all kinds of strangeness. And believe me, there are some people that love to walk through that door. All right, and then question number 5. What are 5 English words that have changed in meaning in recent times? Lots of different possible answers on this one. And someone decided to do like double the number of words that she needed to do.
I don't know where I got 10 from. See that old story head?
Yeah, here.
All right, let's just see if everyone here can come up with an example of one. Now, I know that one person has more than one example, but we'll just take one from you, okay?
Pick one.
Just one example of a word that has changed in meaning over time.
Well, the first one I have down is gay.
Gay. Okay, so what's the change in meaning?
It used to be happy, and now it's homosexual.
Yeah, now it's a pervert. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that is a good example.
I put down thong because when I was a little girl, we bought thongs to wear on our feet, and now they're strips of cloth we call underwear.
This is kind of disturbing me, the way that this is going. We have gay, we have thong.
You don't let me say that, because I call the new thong.
I am absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Now we have to call them flip-flops because the world has changed the definition
Yeah.
to mean.
And I admit that even when I was a kid, we would call them thongs too. But yeah, you do that today and you're going to create some confusion.
Looks.
Yep.
Nuh-uh.
Nope, you don't get to skip.
You
can't.
It's like, you guys were there, I'm done.
See, this is what having friends in the class is
I
for.
actually answered incorrectly. I would have to look back to see why I put what I did, but now I understand what you mean. And if I had to come up with the word, I would say maybe sick, because it could mean ill, but now it means cool, really. I mean, that's sick, man.
Yeah, that's sick. Yeah, so.
Did you really?
Yeah, so yeah, sick is a good example of a word that's changed in meaning.
Bad is good.
Bad is good now. Yeah, talk about something that's confusing.
Exactly.
Exactly. Bad means
Bad to the bone.
Yeah.
bad to the bone.
Yeah. Great examples. Okay, I love it. See, all able to come up with something.
Cell. Cell is a good one.
Cell?
Yes. Cell is a good one.
Cell?
Yes.
What kind of cell?
Like
Spell it.
Like CELL. Like a jail cell.
Jail cell.
And now we have a cell phone.
Ah.
So.
That one didn't really change in meaning, though. That's more of an application.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we still have jail cells and they're
Yeah.
still
Yeah,
what
that's
they are.
true.
Yeah.
True.
That's just different
Yeah.
usages of the same word.
Human cells, or, you know.
Yeah.
That's just different meanings for a word, I guess.
Yeah, that's not really so much a change.
Well, I don't know if it's changed or not, but it has evolved. Troll.
Troll, to be an internet troll is great, yeah.
Oh,
It
the
used to
trolls live
be-
under the bridge.
Yeah, it used to be a mythological creature, and now it's,
Yeah.
yes. Now
Or it's a fishing term.
Yeah, to go trolling, yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, that's more of one of the older uses of it. People don't actually talk about that as much anymore unless you're actually a fisherman.
But see, so that's a good one for that then, in a way.
To a certain extent, it's just kind of fallen out of use. Yeah, but that works.
You're in the fishing crowd.
Exactly, yeah. But other people, when they think of troll, they usually think of really annoying people online. Yeah. Yeah.
So
All right.
Some of those might not be good then, because some of them are still being used, they just have more
more meanings.
current applications.
Yeah, well, I was specifically asking about something that has really changed, and it's hard to find something that has truly completely changed, because a lot of times the original meaning will still be there. But yeah. Well, yeah, the original meaning for that one has showed up in, certain Christmas songs. Don we now our gay apparel.
But they're old
That has
songs.
they're old songs, yeah.
Look at some of the old movies.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
Gay Cabaret or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of people who have watched that in disappointment.
Honestly.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm afraid to use it.
Yeah, you will offend somebody.
Or embarrass myself.
Yeah, that too. Because maybe they are happy and homosexual.
I
In that
am.
case, they're double.
Because that's kind of what
See,
that-
what I was talking about earlier with the YouTube censorship thing, this is what I'm talking about. How did I lose my channel? Yeah, well, that's how I lost
I
it.
got a gold star, I didn't bring duct tape, I'm sorry.
You're fine. All right, and then we skipped problems 6 through 10. We go down to number 11. And those are the ones where we had to do the lexing and we had to do the parsing. Now, technically speaking, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to look up the number in the back of the interlinear. You look up 639 in the back there, and then you use a little parsing chart to figure that out. However, if you knew where these words came from, you could cheat a little bit. Like I showed someone. I'm not saying who. Yeah. But these actually all come from John 1:1, so if you know that, it kind of makes it a lot easier. But what did you guys get for number 11? For the 1639, what was the definition there? Yes.
I'm gonna try.
Anonymous student.
Verb, imperfect, active, indicative, third singular.
You are absolutely correct as far as the parsing. What I was wondering, though, is about the lexing, the 1639, what that goes with.
Definition.
Definition.
That's the definition, not the parsing.
Okay. Oh, I thought it
Because
was.
lex and parse, lexis, what does it mean? If you look up it in the back, it'll tell you what it means.
Yeah. Or in John 1:1, it says it.
I have, are you going to look it up?
Yeah, we'll give him a chance. Give him a chance. He might need a magnifying glass, that much is
Word.
true. Yeah, no.
No.
Not 1639.
Oh, 1639, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Was.
There you go, perfect.
So I have something different.
You do have something different because you actually did it the right way.
Oh, he cheated.
Yeah, he cheated.
Oh, okay.
Does that have to be, exist?
I know.
To be, exist, those are correct definitions as well.
I could go low.
I said possible proper.
Huh?
I said possible proper. Did I do it wrong?
Possible, proper, what?
I'm not so sure about that one.
Maybe I looked at the wrong one.
That one, that doesn't quite sound right. I mean, it's, with the way that Mounts does some things, that might be possible, but
Okay, so you go to 1639 in this book, right?
yeah. Go to 1639 in the back.
Oh, I see what you did. I think you took the second.
Oh, it is possible proper.
Yes.
That's what you
it is
did.
Possible and proper. So that's what I used. Is that right?
That is not where I would have gone, but it is technically within the range of meaning for that word.
Oh, so
I did the very first one, which
Yeah.
was to be, to
Yeah, I'll put that in as a general caveat. When you use the big lexicon in the back of the interlinear, generally you want to go with the first stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if I just didn't catch that.
Because
now
at the
I
very
see.
bottom it says the be, like be verbs, is, are, was, were,
Mm-hmm.
State of being.
Yep.
One of those, I'm sorry, I'm correcting it to English things.
I know those anchor points. Anchor points, yep. All right, and then
You don't have to worry about that.
what did we get for the 4639? What did that mean?
I have
You don't
from,
have-
near, or at, preposition.
Yeah, that's not bad.
I've got from or for the benefit of, plus a lot more.
Plus a lot more. Did anyone have with in there?
I
I
probably
didn't
do.
write with down. I put preposition, from, and
I have with as
Yep.
well.
Yeah, that is the one that it was being used in its original context in John 1:1, but that's okay.
So with was the main one.
With was the one for this particular context, but as long as you had, at least the first line for Mounts, you'll be good. I know that you can find it, that's the important part.
I had a lot of.
she keeps, there's a whole bunch.
I kept listening, but I can't get all of
I
those.
guess if we keep going, we might find John 1:1.
And then what did you get for the P.A? What was that about?
Preposition accusative.
Preposition accusative is correct. Nice. All right, and then what did you guys get for 38, 36? I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
The one, the other, some others, but he,
But,
but
I just
others.
put but. With the article, but.
If you got that it was the article, I would be happy with that.
Then you're happy with me.
I'm happy, yeah.
But is what you wanted to?
No.
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 Just the fact that it is an article.
Yeah, the fact that it is an article, if you got that somewhere in your definition, I'm happy. If you either said that it was article or the,
Okay.
I'm very happy with you.
So what's the difference between looking at the number in the back and looking up here? It's just giving you a different definition pertaining to the context of the verse?
Yeah, the number in the back will give you like every definition that shows up in the
Oh,
New
okay.
Testament.
I see.
But I got it originally from John 1:1, that's why it's in the order that it is. And so that's the original context. Yeah.
Okay, I'm confused.
So if you get it from either place, I'm okay. If you realize that these words come from John 1:1 and you pick those meanings, I'm good with it. If you looked it up in the back and you got everything from there, I'm good with that too.
Okay.
Either one works.
So you said article,
Mm-hmm.
but does it say article in the description?
Yeah, it says that it's the article. It doesn't give article as a definition, but it says that it is the article.
Explanation, and it'll say,
See, that's probably 30.
Yeah, 38, 36 is one that has a really weird, it's just weird.
Okay, 38, 36. Oh, so it does say the article. Okay.
Yep, it is the article.
I see, and I just went down to everything in italics. Okay.
Well, that confused me too. because
It is.
I wanted to just put the first one, because
Yeah.
that's what I figured the answer was.
And then it,
And this is one that's a weird one, and that's frankly the reason why I put it in here is because 38, 36 is one that's really hard to define normally.
and what do you mean by article then? I guess I don't understand that.
It is the Greek. It is the Greek article.
if in English the articles are a, and the.
Yeah.
Defined as articles.
Yeah. However, in Greek it doesn't really work that way.
But just to get the idea of what the word means.
Yeah.
So the word is an article.
Yeah, it is an article.
Right.
It doesn't mean article.
Right.
It is an article.
It is an article.
Okay, it's an article, and we will learn what the Greek article.
Well, actually does. Yeah,
Okay.
later on.
I have a question.
Mhm.
On 38, 36 in John 1:1, I have the,
Yeah.
but then for the parsing code, I have DNSM in the book,
Mm-hmm.
but on the paper I have DASM.
Yes.
Where are we here?
So number 13,
Determiner, accusative, singular, masculine.
but in the book it
DASM.
says NSM. I just wondered if it was a typo or,
No, that depends on which one you're looking at.
oh,
Yeah, you'll see a few different places where 38, 36 shows up in John 1:1. And sometimes it's one kind of article, other times it's another kind of article.
oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's all the article, it's just different forms of it.
I thought I caught the teacher in a mistake.
Well, that's possible too, but not in this particular context. Yeah. All right, so yeah, 38, 36, as long as we can verify that you went to the right place, at least I'm happy. And if you got that it was the article on top of that, then I'm really happy.
I didn't get the article. I was just using those other words, those ones.
Yeah. Okay, and then for the parsing code, the D.ASM, what do we get for that?
Determiner, accusative, singular, masculine.
Nice. That is correct. Determiner, accusative, singular, masculine. Woohoo! Say that 10 times fast.
Nuh-uh.
No, thank you.
I'm all over it.
All right, and then 25, 36 was probably relatively straightforward, I hope. What'd you guys get for that?
So true God.
God.
God or
God.
deity.
Yep.
One for you guys.
God.
Yeah, God will work. It's technically not the most accurate, and this is where Mounts usually does kind of a basic definition for things. Technically, it is the Great One, but we would normally translate that as God. That's how we're used to seeing it, so that's fine. And then what'd you get for the N.ASM?
Noun, accusative, singular, masculine.
There you go. Nice. All right, any questions on what we've done so far? Hey, that's sometimes the way it goes, especially with Greek. Sometimes it's a lot easier to come up with questions than it is answers.
I'm finding that. I don't have more questions.
No, but I think 15 was a trick.
It is not a trick.
Well, it stumped me.
It is somewhat annoying, but it isn't a trick. All right, let's go ahead and get into that then. It says, Lex the following words using either the Biblical Greek, a compact guide, or Mounce's interlinear, which means that you don't have the number code anymore. You have to use your knowledge of the alphabet to actually look it up. So either you're going to use the little lexicon that's in the back of the compact guide or the lexicon in the back, look it up alphabetically, find it that way.
Wait, you can do that in this book too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're all in alphabetical order. They have number codes on them, but they're in alphabetical order as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yep.
Okay, now I'm gonna find it.
You're fine.
I just used the little guy.
Yeah, the little one is easier, and a lot of
Yeah,
these...
that's what I used too, but I could not find that word. I could not find it. And
Okay.
I tried really hard because there's a diphthong, or maybe there's two.
You did what I did. I flipped them around to make a diphthong out of it.
But isn't the NV? Sorry, it was probably not NV.
I know, I know.
but-
Okay, let me go ahead and put in the syllable breaks here.
That's a delta and a nu.
All right, so those are the syllable breaks. It's de,
Or a delta and a.
na, ri, on. So there are no diphthongs in this one.
Oh.
See, I kept making them too, but then I got my list and I was like, oh, I flipped them. I flipped them to
Yeah.
make them diphthongs.
Omicron iota is a diphthong, but iota omicron is not. The
Well,
order's
okay,
wrong.
So the first letter, and then the second and third letter is what I thought were,
See, and I did two
Okay.
first because I had it down.
But I was wrong.
Okay, are you talking about this letter here?
yes,
Eta
and the next letter together.
is nu, which is not a vowel. That's a consonant.
Yeah. Oh, okay, hold on, I wanna see why that confused me.
Well, the reason why it usually confuses me is I have a life and other things are going on. That's what
Yes.
confuses me.
Oh, because on the feud, the last diphthong, that's the E, and then the,
But see, that's a V and not a U. That's a V, I'm
Oh.
sorry.
That's nu, yeah.
No, that's
it's
a,
an
no.
oopsilon.
No, this is nu, not upsilon. If it was upsilon, you'd be okay. But this isn't upsilon, this is nu.
It's more of a V shape, which makes
Yeah,
sense.
you're thinking that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the
See, I did
Oh,
diphthong.
I see the
First, and then I had
difference
to-
now.
Yeah, one has a rounded bottom, the other one comes to a point.
You have to be really specific about those symbols.
Well, and it's
Yes.
hard for me to write them correctly too. I found when I was doing my writing the alphabet that I kept, I would round the V or I would sharpen the U.
Because you're used to the way you're writing your
Yeah.
own alphabet, yeah.
It makes me look like a really sloppy handwriting on there.
I'm
Just saying.
retarded.
I thought your list looked really nice.
Yeah, I was not good at it.
Yeah, you're fine.
That word is on page 167.
All right, so given that, what do we have for the definition of denarion? Yes?
Denarius,
Denarius, you are absolutely correct.
Does that mean money?
money.
Yeah, basically, yeah, denarius.
Many, honey.
Yep. Yeah, and this is another example of a transliteration. We took those characters that are in Greek, we transposed them into English characters that we could pronounce, and that's how we get the word
I
denarius.
wasn't getting it in my word, I have denarion.
Yeah, I know.
It
I
wasn't.
needed
I'm
it.
convinced.
All right, and
It
then
just appeared in this book because I
You're-
can't tell you how many times I looked.
Miraculous.
And
Well, I think it was hard for me to find too, but I did find it because I was like determined.
I was like,
go through every
John's
single one
trying
one
to
by
check
one.
Alphabet right beside me, and I'm looking and saying, what?
oh, that's funny. Okay, I got it.
It's also number 1324. Because I found it there too.
Okay, moving on.
All right, and then the next word is therismos. And what do we come up with a definition for that one?
Harvest.
Harvest. Oh, that was too simple. I need to pick harder words next time.
Except I had a P, but there should have been an R, so my word was just kind of really crazy.
Hapist.
The pismos.
Oh, you
Like,
did
what is
the
the
Greek
pismos?
word also.
Well, the P for row, it looks like a P, but it's.
It's not P, but it's row, yeah.
Confusing.
So I
Yep.
messed myself up.
So we have denarion, therismos, and then number 17 is metron. And what did we find out for metron? What does it mean?
Measure.
Measure. Yep.
And I looked at that metron, meter, measure. I don't know why I did that, but I did. Don't ask me why.
Random associations.
It is. I do. That's how I remember things. The random associations.
Maybe that's why it's a V and not a
Yeah.
whatever.
Yes.
All right, and then the final one, number 18, we have pentheo. And what'd you guys get for that? Pentheo.
Mourn.
I mourn.
To mourn.
Yep, I mourn.
I mourn.
Yeah. That is one of the Greek verbs, and like all Greek verbs, well, almost all Greek verbs, it has an implied pronoun, and that's why it has the I on there, I mourn. If you looked it up in the interlinear, though, it might not have it on there, and that's okay if you didn't pick up the pronoun, but technically it has a pronoun.
It said I mourn. Is that the pronoun?
I is the pronoun, yep. And if you did it with or without, that's fine, because one of them has it on, the other one doesn't, and if you looked it up in one and not the other, you'll get it. All right, so that was the assignment that we had from last week. Any questions before we move on to new material? Going once. Going twice.
Greek is as clear as mud.
I agree.
Pretty much. All right, let's go ahead and get started then.
On the rest of the lesson?
Yep,
Okay.
we'll continue where we left off. At least try to.
They're talking and keep
Bottom of the
over
page, we
here.
have one more. I'm laughing at myself. Me and my magnifying glass to read that little book.
And I saw what she was doing and I was cracking up.
This I can see, this is like a
At least you
14 or
can see, yeah.
18 maybe.
Yeah, the note pages are nice. Now, we are going to have a quiz, just because we always have a quiz, so you will need a separate sheet of paper for this one, because I don't have it marked out in the notes.
Gotcha. We have
Yep,
Oh,
Together.
quiz.
yep, separate sheet of paper,
Take it out.
1 through 5. You don't have to take it out, you can write it there if you want to, but put some place where you can put your answers.
Okay.
We'll put it like that. All right, so
Oh,
here,
okay, I'm just gonna go to the bottom of this page.
Okay.
some place where you'll remember it or something like that. So here's your quiz. Some of these quiz questions you've seen before, not these exact same ones, that would be too easy, but similar problems you've seen before. Some of them are a little bit new.
Which pair of letters is in the Greek? Oh, okay.
This one I simplified a little bit from last time, because last time I had like strings of 6 letters. Thought 2 would be a little bit easier.
Oh, I got it.
I need to think. Can I cheat?
Well, you can use your resources, you just can't talk to people. That's the only rule.
That's fine. I just,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Quizzes are open book, open note, they're just not open person.
Open person. Oh, that throws me off.
Yeah, no phone a friend.
So I'm confused on that capital upside down V. Go back to my numbers.
And I tried to do it like last time, where there's one of the options in the list that is a definite no.
Yeah.
But of course that doesn't give you the definite yes, but most of them have a definite no. 4 kind of doesn't. 4 is just one, either you know it or you don't. Either you took good notes or you didn't take good notes.
Okay. Huh.
Oops. I don't like the bonus question.
Nobody likes the bonus question.
I'm opt out of that one.
There's a reason why it's the bonus question.
Simplification.
That's about the only thing throughout this course that I can't grasp it.
Me too.
It doesn't make sense to me. So I'll just have to say words,
There's a reason why it's a bonus.
but I'm gonna try, all right?
Yeah. There you go. And with syllabification, usually the best way to go at it is just to try to pronounce it out loud. And eventually you usually wind up stumbling across the correct one.
Okay, oops.
Hint on number 4, I did give you word lists last week on number 4. I gave you a list of transliterations, I gave you a list of traditionals.
Yes.
And from those lists, you should be able to get it, but you'd have to do a little bit of digging. Hopefully not too much, though.
Okay, so that's a transliteration. Okay.
And for the online people, as usual, when it comes to these things, there's not a whole lot that's going on, and you're just sitting there staring at a screen. But like I said before, if we had the camera on people, you'd have a lot more to see.
Yeah.
Some people frantically running back and forth in pages, other people staring blankly. I wasn't talking about you.
I don't know. My eyes were tripping.
Then you have other people that always take the pensive approach, you know, they just thinking through everything and thinking through everything and thinking through everything. They usually wind up overthinking it. Yeah, because someone wanted to do 10 instead of 5.
Okay, I think I got everything. I've got it wrong, but you know.
But I have answers for everything. There you go. I have incorrect answers for everything, but I have all of them.
I have answers.
Are we pretty much agreed on 5 being the hardest one?
Usually.
Yeah.
I counted it out, and this is where I think it is.
Hey, it's at least better than nothing.
Huh?
There are no V's.
Those are N's. Those are N's. I'm just gonna let it be because I'm not gonna overthink it.
All right.
That's what's throwing that out there. It's a bonus. I don't care. Well, I do care, but I don't care.
All right, so are you finished with all 5?
I am.
You are? Take it you too, Lindsay? Then you have those people that finish ahead of schedule, and then you just sit there going, well, I guess we're going to twiddle our thumbs for a little while.
Or I could just sit here and second guess.
Yeah, as useful as that is. That's usually not what you want to do.
I'm pretty confident in the multiple choice questions, but the bonus one.
Multiple guess.
1 in 4 chance.
Exactly.
Yeah. I definitely had some students when I was teaching who insisted on taking all of their tests that way.
With multiple choice?
No, just multiple guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't like this one, Mr. Johnson, because I can't guess on it. Okay.
Okay, and on number 5 on the assignment, what are the 5 English words that have changed in meaning in recent times? I put Christ, prophet, apostle, baptized, angel, based on, hold on, let me go back and tell you what it's based on. Transliterations. The ones that you had given before. I think the question just confused me.
No.
But anyway.
That's okay, because there were a couple that they had these big definitions, and he's like, discuss.
It just means the.
Yeah.
It means that. It's an article. Yeah. Yeah. Which is why I try to go over the homework before we go into it, because you're right, it's hard to read someone's mind. And I had students who were very confused about that. You don't grade the homework, Mr. Johnson? No, I don't. I grade the quizzes, I grade the tests, but I don't grade the homework because that's where you're still trying to figure out what the questions mean and stuff like that. Unless you didn't do it, then I give you a 0.
Yeah.
Now, as long as the administration let me give them a 0.
Okay, I'm as done as I think I'm gonna get.
Me too.
Yes.
These syllables have never gone along well.
But the syllables, they love you.
I remember when you're in class and they're like, just clap it out.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Can you do that with Greek words?
You could.
Could, but only if you knew where the syllables were.
If you know where the syllables were. Yeah, that's always the hard thing.
Clap all I want.
It's like a circle.
Yeah,
This is a very vicious cycle, guys. Yeah, it's like dictionaries, you know. I want to figure out what the word means, but when I look up the definition, it gives it to me in words. So I have to know words to look up words. Yeah.
It's like a dog chasing his tail. I mean,
I can relate to that.
All right, we'll give us one more minute, and then we will go ahead and figure out where we are. Hopefully on planet Earth. It's a good place to be. I still need to get that Jeopardy music loaded on my computer. At least we could have something to listen to while we go through this. Okay, it might be a problem for some people.
just some relaxing piano music or something would be helpful.
That's really a word, right?
Which one?
That one we're supposed to be putting in syllables.
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is a Greek word.
Really is a word.
It's not an English word, but it's a Greek word.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can finding it in the back of this book too.
I don't know if that one will show up in the compact guide, because the compact guide doesn't have all the words in it.
And I'm looking alphabetical order, and it should be, that letter should be before it.
All right, about 30 seconds left.
Oh, come on.
That's how I felt too, but then I did it anyways.
Well, I did it,
I have nothing else to do, might as well.
Because I think that is a LOGOS before it. So I think it'll be. How's that for random?
All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Last time.
All right, let's see how we did. For number 1, we'll start off like we did last time. What is the one that is definitely wrong?
D.
C.
C is definitely wrong.
Yeah, C is definitely.
Why is C definitely
Because
wrong?
that is omega is the last letter of the alphabet.
Yeah, if you begin with the end, we've got a problem.
Yes.
It's the begin. They're switched. It's the ending
Yes.
and the beginning.
Yeah.
Beginning and the end.
Yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, if you start off with omega trying to argue that this is an alphabetic order, you've got some problems.
Yeah, so you took the ending and then you start.
Yeah. Now if we switched it, we'd have a good one, but
Yes.
yeah. All right, so C was definitely wrong. Now let's go back to the beginning and actually try to figure out which one was right. What about A? Is A right, wrong, indifferent? If it is wrong, why?
A is right.
That's right.
I said it was right.
You think that rho comes before upsilon.
That's it.
Yes.
But that's a diphthong.
It's not. It doesn't matter if it's a diphthong or not. We're just asking, is it in alphabetic order?
Oh,
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
rho
sorry.
does come before
I don't want to-
upsilon. You're absolutely right.
I was gonna say because my list said so.
Yep. All right, and then in B, gamma does not come before beta. It should be beta gamma.
Yes.
So that was a problem. And then in D, theta comes actually quite a bit ahead of P.
Yes.
All right, so how do we do on that one? Did we do bad, good,
got it.
got it?
No, I had B. I did it.
You're okay. Hey, at least you didn't have C. That's the one I'm happy about.
Yeah.
We didn't think that I'm happy. I really am.
It helped me with only having 2. When we had to do like 3 or 4, I was like,
Oh, the last one I gave you guys 6, so
Oh,
yeah,
6, that's-
I cut it down quite a bit. All right, number 2, which English word is transliterated by capital lambda, iota, omicron, nu? There's one of these that is definitely wrong. Which one is that?
D.
yes.
D, because it starts out with an N instead of an L.
Yes.
And yeah, that was tricky throwing that capital in there because I don't have the capitals quite.
I don't
memorized.
either.
Most people don't have the capital memorized. That's why I did it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, John.
That was me being mean. All right, so there's that part that's down. So we know that it wasn't the N because that's not an N. That's not a nu. And then another thing that always messes people up is you look for diphthongs, which is a good thing to do.
Yes.
But there are some combinations that look really close to a diphthong that aren't. And that's what's going on here.
Oh.
If this was omicron iota, then it would have been a diphthong. And it would have been A. But it's not that diphthong. The word is wrong. So
I did it again. I did it again.
You like the diphthongs. You
I
like
flip.
them.
I keep like to flip them.
one way or the other. Yep. Yeah. Oi is a diphthong.
Oh, yes.
E-ah is not. All right. So, and then we have to pick between lion and Leon. And yes, since you're waving your hands frantically, which of the those two would it be?
It's Leon.
It's Leon. Why is it Leon?
Because it's iota instead of iota.
Yeah, iota. Yep.
Iota.
Now, why is the iota saying its name, though? Why is it long in this case? It's not always long.
Oh.
Why is it long in this case?
Answer that
Because
question.
it's followed by another vowel.
You are absolutely right. It's followed by another vowel, so it says its name.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't think of that while I was
For-
guessing.
No, I didn't
even
either.
in,
Go back to that
Greek
page.
it's that way?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Adjacent vowels.
That's how I pronounced it.
So adjacent vowels, first one is the sound. Same thing in English.
It doesn't always work that way with Greek because some of the Greek diphthongs are weird, but when it comes to iota, if it's followed by a vowel, it will say its name.
Okay, well, all the other vowels do that?
No,
Just the iota.
just iota.
Just the iota, so that's.
Just iota, it works that way.
Okay.
If iota is followed by a vowel, it'll say its name. That does not work with the other vowels, though.
Otherwise, what is it? Otherwise, how do you pronounce it?
What do you mean?
It says its name,
Mm-hmm.
E.
Yeah, what's the short form of iota?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Eh.
If, short eyes,
Oh,
if.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
But you pronounce iota, and you
Mhm.
already said it's the first sound of the word.
Yeah, iota is the weird one.
Oh,
Because it can sound like a Y, it can sound like I, and it can sound like E.
It's kind of like the letter E, or like the letter Y. Sometimes it's like in the word type, T-Y-P-E, it's a long I. Usually on the end of words, it's an E sound. Picky.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
always the one.
Yeah, this is the problem child of Greek vowels.
The iota. Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah, it has 3 different sounds, and it says its name when it's followed by a vowel or if it's the last letter in a word. Otherwise, it's short, except if it is a part of a Hebrew name and it's at the beginning of the Hebrew name.
There you go.
Okay, I need to study that again.
Did you guess?
Exactly,
I
right?
don't know what I thought.
It's there, yeah. Main point to remember is it says its name when it's followed by a vowel or at the end of a word. That's the main thing to get. Otherwise, it's I.
Okay.
All right, number 3.
I do know.
This, as far as the one that is definitely wrong, I think there's probably a few contenders, but there's one that is definitely wrong.
C.
C, yeah. You never want to assume that it has a single meaning. I would completely agree with you on that. So, now that we've figured out which one is definitely wrong, which one is right?
I put D, multiple.
D also.
You are all correct.
Multiple can be
Yeah.
2 or 3
or
or any
more.
number.
Yeah.
Or more.
It's like all of the above.
Pretty much, except for single.
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple was correct. If you said that it's most often 2 meanings, most often 3 meanings, well, I guess you could find a law of averages or something like that, but yeah, that's not what we were going for. All right, number 4, if you had all of the notes from last time, you probably got it. If you didn't, you just stared at it and said, well, that's interesting.
It is, and I have the notes.
Can I try to?
Sure, yeah.
I think I answered D.
You would be correct.
And it's because that's why I brought that question up, because it was the same thing I did with question number 5 on the assignment. I thought that's what you meant in the question, so.
Yeah. Satan is a transliteration. The others are all traditionals.
Yes, I just found that out when I looked at it.
Traditional, traditional, traditional. But D is the transliteration. Hey, we're good.
I see it.
All right, and then,
Yeah, that's what.
I know what that word is.
all right, now we'll start out with the simple part of this. How many syllables should it have?
3?
3, you are right. Okay, this pair right here could be a diphthong, except it's in the wrong order.
Yes.
Yeah. If it was omicron iota, it would have been a diphthong, it would have functioned together, and we would have only had 2 syllables. But it's not in that order, so we have 3.
Yes.
All right, so it is indeed 3.
I'm glad I'm not the only one struggling. I'm struggling.
Come on, write with me.
Technion.
What'd you say?
I said technion.
Technion.
Yeah, that's right.
Whatever it means.
So how many syllables is that? It's 3. And where are we breaking it?
Technion.
Oh, and I forgot a letter.
Yes.
I was gonna say, there's not
so
missing in
it's
there.
not.
Yep, I forgot a letter.
Technion.
Go away.
So,
Right? Technion, right?
I want this thing right. This looks absolutely awful.
it's like signing your name on those pads at the
know.
stores with your
Oh, those are
finger.
awful. I hate that.
Okay,
So it's text, then me, and then on.
correct. So we have breaks between the kappa and the first nu, and then between the iota and the omicron.
Oh, dang, I was wrong. But close. I just got the first one.
Woo, I got it. Just because he said sound it out, and I was like, okay, that's as far as I'm going.
Little child.
And technion is often used as a diminutive, little one, come here.
Oh, so technion means little one? More like-
Basically,
A
yeah.
little child.
And it can also be used as an insult. Yeah.
Ah.
But that's not as common.
Oh, technion. I gotta start using
If you're
it.
still going, technion.
Well, and I found it in this one too, but it's missing one letter. It's just technon.
So that's
It's a different word.
Yes, I
But it
saw
says
that
the
one
same
too.
thing, it says child still.
It's not child. It's the title child. It's the difference between saying this is a child and you, child, come here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a noun? This one would be the noun.
Yeah, this is the appellative form. This is the form that you're using when you're addressing someone.
Okay.
This is the pet name, basically. Little one, come here.
Come here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently you're teaching your kids something because you told them what nice used to mean.
Yes. I found that quite funny, and I actually looked it up further because I wanted to know why. And it was interesting.
I did a little bit of that too, yes.
All right, so questions about the quiz?
I gotta stop flipping my diphthongs.
Diphthongs will kill. They're dangerous things.
Those flipping diphthongs.
Flipping diphthongs.
All right, so including the bonus, for those of us who wish to admit, did any of us get the 3 out of 4 goal?
I got 5 out of 5.
Oh,
Oh, show off.
Well done, pass the gold star.
there. Here's your gold star.
I'll pass it on next week.
Okay.
I actually missed 3 of them.
I got 4.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty good.
This is my first time to get 100%, including, well, actually, do I get 125%?
No.
No extra credit.
But the bonus, what's the bonus worth?
The bonus is a replacement grade.
Oh, pfft, you're not fair.
Yeah, my students didn't like that either. Mr. Johnson, I did all of the bonus work. Did you need to? Well, I got 100 on everything else, so you didn't need to.
The person who.
Oh, so I need to.
Can't we carry it over for later use?
There you go.
Yeah.
Can it roll over to another
What's
one?
if I miss them?
No.
Hey, I remember when I homeschooled you, if we did bonuses, I gave you extra points.
Yep, and then I grew up and I became mean.
Yeah.
I thought I was mean.
I said, I'm mean. All right.
You won't mean enough.
Let's go ahead and get into the lesson. We're in section 3 now. We've already done the first 2 sections. And this is root-based definition. And it's actually kind of part of a larger category of people asking where things came from. which is always an interesting question. Where did this word come from? What did it originally mean? It's an interesting question, but the problem is what it meant at some time in the past doesn't really have much of a meaning at some later period. And that especially applies in Greek. People will look up and they'll say, okay, where does this word come from eventually? And they'll go back into the Attic Greek and the Classical Greek, and they'll find definitions and roots there and all those kinds of things. But of course the problem is that we're in Koine Greek, we're not in Attic Greek, we're not in Classical Greek, so those meanings don't really matter. But specifically when it comes to the issue of roots, people love root-based definitions, unfortunately. They say, okay, what are all the parts of the word? And if I can figure out what all the parts of the word mean, then I know what the whole word means. Sometimes that works. Like a grasshopper is something that hops in the grass. You can kind of figure it out from the parts. But it doesn't work with all words. Pineapple is a really great example. It does not grow on a pine tree, and it ain't an apple.
True.
Doesn't really work. Sometimes the parts don't really have any bearing on the whole. And that occurs in English, and that also occurs in Greek. And so it becomes a bit of an issue. One word that shows up a lot of times in a lot of people's sermons that they make frequent misuse of is the Greek word ekklesia. 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 And it does have historically two roots, ek and kaleo. And ek means out from, and kaleo means to call. And so you get preachers that stand up there and say, ekklesia means to call out from. And then they go into this big long spiel about something to doing with, people being called out from somewhere else. And this is actually the word that very frequently gets translated as the word church. And so they'll say the church are the people who have been called out. They'll say we've been called out for the world and therefore we should be pure. And I agree with the conclusion, but the problem is the roots don't actually have anything to do with that being the case. The fact that the Bible teaches us that we should not be like the world is where we get that. Not because of the roots. But some people will go for the roots and they'll try to do it that way, which is entirely incorrect. And of course, saying that, the church is the people who have been called out by God doesn't really work with all of the uses of that word in the New Testament. And we saw this last time. In Acts 19:32, that word is used to describe a mob that goes after Paul's companions in Ephesus. That's not a church. That is not people who have been called out by God. Just saying. But you will hear preachers preach very long, very involved sermons on the roots of these words, trying to put things together, and it just doesn't matter.
So Acts 19:32 is the one where they're using mob.
Or they're using what?
Mob.
Mob.
They usually translate it as assembly there, but descriptively it's a mob.
It's more accurately a mob, okay.
I would actually argue that assembly is more correct.
It is more correct.
Yeah,
okay.
but
Mob sounds better.
mob sounds better, yes.
Okay, so
For the visual.
Yes.
Yeah, for the visual, yeah.
Mob is better.
so that's what you're trying to say, is that they
They were mad and they were going after him.
Yeah, they were.
So it is still a mob.
Yeah, it is a mob,
Uh-huh.
but when the word is used in Acts 19:32, it isn't in reference to the mob, it's into the fact that they're assembled together.
The mob is assembled together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so that is an example where the whole root thing just doesn't really work. You can spend a really great sermon on, you've been called out by God, and you can make it sound really good, but the problem is that's not really the way the word works. And if you tried to do that in Acts 19:32, you'd have a really strange statement. The mob that went after Paul's companions was called out by God, and I don't think so. Not quite right. All right, did you guys get all of the words on that one?
Is there a reason that one is capitalized?
Yeah, it's the beginning of a sentence.
Same letter?
Beginning of the sentence.
Okay. Oh, I guess it is.
Yep.
Well, but do you have a capital after a colon?
If it's a complete sentence, yeah.
That's okay.
Yep.
There's my problem.
And that's always the fun thing about studying another language. You get to go back and say, how does this work in English?
Yeah.
So what if the little hyphens over the two letters? Does it matter?
Hyphens?
You've got little,
Forward apostrophe.
You got the little forward apostrophe.
Okay, this is not a forward apostrophe.
Okay, what is that?
That is just an accent mark.
like you're dotting your eye.
Oh, okay.
It's not dotting your eye, it's an accent mark.
That's how I was thinking about it.
So it's an accent mark for what? Or we just haven't gotten into that yet, right?
We will not get into that. Yeah, those are all different kinds of accent marks.
So, does it matter?
It does not matter for pronunciation whatsoever.
Okay. What does it matter for?
The only time where it will ever become a bit of an issue is when you're dealing with homonyms. It's how in Greek they distinguish between words that sound the same. They'll put different accents on them.
Gotcha. We're not going there.
We're not. Okay, so regarding Koine Greek roots, ecclesia may have the roots ek out from and ecclesia to
No.
call. What?
That's kaleo.
Kaleo. Oh, sorry. Kaleo to call, but it does.
Kaleo.
Kaleo. Okay.
No A.
Sorry. To call, but it does not follow that ecclesia means those who have been called out by God. Okay, but what you're saying, it is actually an assembly of a mob that is assembled.
In Acts 19:32 it is.
In Acts 19:32.
Yeah. This word can be used to describe the church, but it can also be used to describe a mob that's going after Paul's companions. It's a very generic word.
So it's in context is where you find its meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so
You could actually translate it as assembly pretty much everywhere you see it, and it would still make sense. That's the most general meaning that would capture everything. But most people don't translate it that way. They usually try to be a little bit more specific.
it does.
Okay.
Did you ready for dinner or what?
Yes.
Okay. So basically what you're saying that what it seems to mean, it doesn't necessarily always mean.
What I'm saying is that the roots of the word have nothing to do with what the word actually means.
Okay.
Yes, I can pull out the roots, ek and kaleo, and I can create some kind of a meaning from that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's actually what the word means. The roots have nothing to do with it. How the word is actually used in time and space is what determines what it means.
Context, context.
Yes. Yes, and yes.
Learned that well.
There you go.
Some things stick.
There you go. All right, section 4 has a really long name. We'll skip that. All right, waiting. All right, in this section, we're going to talk about 3 particular things that you always need to be aware of. And these fall under the general category of context, which we've talked about like a bazillion times, but specific areas within context that we need to look at. So no word means anything by itself. You look up the word by itself in the parsing codes like we did before, the Lexington parsing codes. You look it up in the back and there's like 1,000 different definitions there, right? How do you know which one? Well, lots of different things determine it. Here's a few of the major ones that you'll need to be aware of. First one is morphology. Okay. Morphology is the form that something takes. When it morphs, it changes form. In English, we don't have a ton of morphology. We have a little bit with our verbs, and we have an itty tiny bit with our nouns. For example, cat versus cats is a morphological change. I added an S.
It morphed.
It morphed. The form that you're looking at changed. Yeah, and in this case, it means singular or plural. You're right. Yeah. Cat is you have a problem. Cats is you have many problems.
Yes, you do.
I have many problems.
My neighbor does.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have a ton of morphology in English, but in Greek, everything morphs, except for prepositions and a few other things, but almost everything else morphs. The article morphs, all of the nouns morph, all of the adjectives morph, all of the pronouns morph, the verbs, the infinitives, participles, they all morph, and they all have their own things that are going on. Pretty much everything morphs.
You're saying that they morph often or that they have morphed? I'm getting confused with.
They morph
Oh, okay.
often. They morph often.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was confused with the tense you were using because you weren't saying they did morph or
Yeah.
they have morph.
No, they do morph.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You can look at it and you'll say, okay, that's the same number code. That's, 2252 or whatever it is. You can look at this one over here is 2252, but they don't look the same at all. It's because there's a morphological change that's going on.
Okay. Understood.
Yep. And of course, the meaning isn't quite the same. There's a connection between cat and cats, but it still doesn't technically mean exactly the same thing. One's singular, one's plural. Another issue is syntax. Syntax is word order. In English, we are very, very, very syntax dependent. Greek is not as much, but there is still syntax. In English, an example could be something like, a man hit a ball. That's fairly standard baseball, right? Or a lot of other sports, but we'll say baseball. Now, if I change the positions of two words, I change it from being a normal day in sports to being kind of a sad story. A ball hit a man.
Jeez.
Yeah. Then it's a little bit of a sad story. One's kind of normal, everyday sports. The other one, that's not so good. The order matters. The order changes who is doing what to whom and all those kinds of things. It's not exactly the same as it is in Greek. Greek is not greatly syntax dependent like English is, but there are some things that are syntax dependent.
Okay.
And you will need to be aware of those. But I'm just warning you ahead of time, they're not as obvious as they are in English. In Greek, you can change word order around all the time, and not all of them will have a significant meaning. For example, the phrase, Jesus loves John in Greek, you can say 16 different ways and it means the same thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Order is not fixed in Koine Greek at all. But there are some things that are order dependent. It's just not as many.
You said 16 different ways because you looked it up and figured it out.
Well, actually, you can say it over 1,000 different ways, but 16 main ways.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my mind around how you know all this. Really? But move on. Carry on.
This is his pastime.
Yeah, someone like that. Well, actually, that one I actually got from a online friend of mine, not a true friend of mine, but an online friend of mine by the name of Daniel Wallace that I've talked with sometime. He actually wrote a book on Greek grammar.
Wow.
Syntax beyond the... Huh?
You read it?
No.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like over 800 pages long, and he keeps asking me if I've gotten through anything. It's like, I got halfway through the title,
Yeah. So you're corresponding with Daniel Wallace.
From time to time. He's a busy guy, though.
Oh, I know he
Yeah.
is. So.
Yeah, he's got tons of things that he does, and he also is not in very good health. So if you think about him, pray for him.
Oh, I see that little baby duck.
Yeah, he's not related to them, but yeah, that was a very sad situation too. Yeah. Well, that was a downer.
Sorry.
All right, moving on. Further, how the word relates to other words in the language can shade a particular instance of its use. And this is where we have all those wonderful things like synonyms and antonyms and homonyms. And when it comes to translation, most people are pretty good at remembering antonyms and homonyms. When it comes to translation, most people are just fine with that. If I have the Greek word for good, I know it means the opposite of evil, and I'm not going to translate it as if it was evil. Most people get that. And homonyms, there's these two words that look alike, but they have different accent marks on them. It's probably a reason why there's two different entries in the lexicon. I should probably make sure that I know which accent mark it is, It's a little hard to get at first, but most people eventually figure out homonyms too. The one that they almost always forget is synonyms. Synonyms bite translators in the hind end very frequently, because what translators love to do is they love to figure out the subtle differences in meanings, and they want to translate subtle differences in meanings. The problem, though, is that the original speakers sometimes didn't mean for there actually to be any great difference in meaning, even if they use different words. For example, in English, if you ask someone if they would like a pop, or if you ask someone if they would like a soda, they'll probably give you the same answer either way. Because it's the same thing.
Or Coke. You want Coke.
Or do you want... Well, Coke, that one you can get in some fights over. Now, are you saying Coke or are you saying Pepsi?
That's true.
You can always determine where someone's from based on how...
I was going to say, back east it's soda, here it's pop.
Well, back east, when I was stationed back east, I wanted a milkshake that is known as a frap back there.
Oh, I didn't like
I'm looking
that.
right at the machine
We've
and everything,
looked there.
and I asked for a milkshake, and she says, what?
What do you want us to do with your milk?
Can you see that machine right there?
What do you
One of
that?
those.
Was it
Huh?
Where was this? What state?
Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. We were
There's no accounting for Massachusetts.
Okay, we were in Delaware, and we never had
It's
that.
Fort Douglas,
But we
Massachusetts,
did-
where I was
Oh,
stationed for 6 months, yeah.
Okay.
Going through radio school there.
I see. 'Cause,
Yeah.
yeah, this is like in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I'm arguing with her. You see that machine?
I want what comes out of
You
that.
put milk and ice cream? That's a frap.
Okay.
Alrighty then.
No, I want a milkshake.
All right, let's get into this a little bit more detail. Morphology example, the cat ate the bird. Versus, the cat was eaten by the bird. One is a sad story. The other one's a scary story.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you have the cat being eaten by the bird, that's a big bird.
it's a big bird.
Or a small cat.
Or a small cat, yeah.
Either way, it's sad.
Either way, it's well, the first one's sad. I'd argue that the second one's scary.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
All right, and this is a morphological change. How it actually looks has changed. Ate versus was eaten by. We added extra words to it. We changed the letters that we're using, putting words before and after and all those kinds of things. That's morphological changes. And grammatically, it changes it from being active to passive. We'll get into that in more detail later. But main point is this is an example of morphological change. It doesn't look like it used to. It changes what's happening in the sentence. It changes what the meaning is. Here is an example of this in Greek. And on earth, peace among people with whom he is pleased. Luke 2:14 in the Net Bible. Go to Luke 2:14 in the KJV and it will read, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. Think about those for a few minutes and you'll pretty quickly realize that they're not saying exactly the same thing. One is a general statement in the KJV, goodwill toward men, just in general. The other one is not a general statement. It takes the peace and it qualifies it. This is peace for people with whom he is pleased. The other one is peace, and then it just simply adds on to it, and goodwill toward men. What's the difference? Well, it's a morphological difference. Eudokios versus eudokia. The difference is a sigma at the end. And it has to do with the genitive and the nominative. You guys don't know what that is yet, so don't worry about it.
I read those definitions, but
I read them.
they didn't mean much.
They didn't stick yet. That's okay. So the difference has to do with a sigma. That alone changes whether this is something that's added on to the statement or something that qualifies the statement. That one little letter. Now, some of you are probably wondering which one was actually original.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. This is a textual variant. And sometimes what would happen in the ancient manuscripts is they'd be writing along, and when it came to a lot, they didn't have the idea of separate words like we do. They didn't have spaces between words, things like that. So if you wanted to say a word like upside down, and you got to the end of the line, you just carry it over. Keep continuing the word on the next line. You wouldn't put there's a hyphen or anything like that, you just carry it on down.
So syllables didn't mean much when they had to go to a different line.
Not even syllables, yeah, you're right. And so, but when it came to a point where you just had one letter left at the end of a word, they didn't have quite enough space for it, what they'd usually do, if it was just one letter, is they'd write it really small on the same line instead of carrying it on down to the next line. The problem, though, is that some scribes missed that little letter. It looks like a smudge on the page, especially as the manuscript gets pretty old. They forget it, and then they copy it without it, and you just change the word. And this is what happened in the transcription process. Eudokia is what wound up in the KJV. The KJV is based on some later manuscripts where the sigma got left off. The Net Bible is based on the earlier manuscripts that still had the sigma.
What's the Net Bible?
New English Translation.
Oh, I've never heard of
Yeah, it's more common in scholarly circles. It's basically a translator's Bible.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, it's a translator's Bible.
I don't even know that people.
Oh, I don't even
It's not my
get
people.
on the front porch.
But yeah, the difference between qualifying a statement and the difference between adding on to the statement, one little letter,
That's interesting.
Okay, so
But it makes the whole difference.
They shrunk the C,
the sigma.
the sigma.
It's not a
Yes,
C.
sorry, you're right.
It's a sigma.
You're right.
It looks like a C,
They
but it's a
shrunk
sigma.
the sigma, they put it on there because they didn't have enough room.
Mhm.
So when somebody came along and saw that little shrunken sigma, they didn't think much of it and let it go.
Well, what happens is these manuscripts get old,
Yeah.
and you're going to get smudges here and there.
Yeah.
And if you have this itty bitty thing right there, it looks just like another
It
smudge.
could be just, okay, I see
Yeah,
what you're saying.
you'll miss it really easily.
Okay.
And actually, I have an example of that here. Come on. You know, I don't want to
It's a really
save.
cool program that like does lots of cool
Yeah.
things. Cool.
Here you can see
Ah,
an example of that happening at the end.
so that's indicating that that's the end of the word.
That's the end of the word, and instead of taking those letters and putting them on the next line, they just wrote them really small. And if you don't know what those letters are, it looks just like a smudge.
Can I look really, really close?
Yeah, there's actually 2 letters there.
So why did they put 2 on that one? Just
Yeah.
Because I thought like.
Just convenience.
to
Yeah.
toss it in there.
Yeah, and it was usually up to the individual scribes. Sometimes they would continue on down to the next line, but if they thought they could fit it on there, like some students when they're first learning how to write, will just squish it all together. You know?
You've got the whole piece of paper.
And
don't you?
then also, things cost a lot back then. You know,
Yeah.
you use a papyrus or vellum, animal vellum, and so conservative. They're being conservative with things. And yes, and but
Yes.
then when somebody else is looking at it, what is this? Yeah.
It makes sense to the writer, not to the reader.
Exactly. The person who had to write this, it made sense to them, but the person who's looking at it afterwards, if the page gets smudged, you're not going to know what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And if your eyesight is bad, and you're looking at this teeny tiny font, it's like, this is my best guess.
They didn't have these in those days.
That's
They didn't.
right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
no magnifying glasses, no LASIK surgery. Yeah. Sadness, yeah. So that is what would happen with those kinds of situations. That's why we have some of those variants.
Interesting.
All because of one little letter. All right, moving on. English syntax example. We've already done something similar to this. These 2 sentences are exactly the same except for the positions of the words cat and bird. And we have the same reversal that we had on the last one. The last time we did it by changing the verb. This time we're doing it by changing the order of the nouns. So this is a syntax example. The forms did not morph. If the forms changed, if it became birds instead of bird, that'd be morphological. But here, form is exactly the same. Cat, cat, bird, bird. Only thing that changed was where they are in the sentence. That's syntax.
Who ate who?
Yes.
Yep.
That's syntax.
Yeah, if it's, no.
Or who?
No, syntax is when the forms don't change, just the positions. Syntax is a change in position.
Syntax is the order.
Yeah, syntax is order.
Order. Okay.
Yeah, syntax has to do with the position, it has to do with the order.
Okay. The order or position. Okay.
Yeah. Morphology is what letters you add on to it, what helping words you add on to it, so on and so forth.
There we go.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was who is who, right?
That was the signification here, yeah.
Yes.
That's what it wound up changing. All right, Koine syntax example. Now this is a fairly technical rule, but you guys will need to learn it.
Okay.
Subjunctive preceded by hidna. This one does have a forward apostrophe above the leading vowel, so you do have to have the H sound on there, so it's hidna. Subjunctive preceded by hidna. And we will cover this again, so if you don't get it quite right now, don't freak out, because we will cover it again and again and again and again and again, because people always forget this one. So you have to cover it again. But if you have a subjunctive that is preceded by hinna, which means that the hinna is out in front and then you have the subjunctive following, and you guys don't know what the subjunctive is yet, don't worry about that. But you just need to know that there's an order. The hinna comes first and then the subjunctive. If that's the case, it indicates purpose. The author is saying, I did this for this reason. This was my purpose. A lot of times, if the subjunctive is by itself, it instead indicates possibility. But not if it's preceded by hinna. If hinna comes first, it's talking about purpose. Subjunctive by itself can be possibility, but if "in" is involved and if it's in front.
Okay, but you're telling us right now we don't know what a subjunctive is.
Yeah, you don't know what a subjunctive is right now.
It's not something we've learned.
You know,
right?
no.
Okay.
You don't know what a subjunctive is.
Just making
And
sure
I don't
I'm
expect you to right now.
understanding
Yeah. Yeah, subjunctive, you guys don't know what it is right now. All that you need to know right now is that if it has a hina in front of it, it indicates purpose.
Hina indicates purpose.
Hina in front of a subjunctive indicates purpose.
Okay. Hina in front of a subjunctive
Indicates purpose. Yep.
Okay.
All right, so let's take a fairly famous example that most people will wound up misinterpreting. And part of it is because how it gets translated into English. It's not actually an inaccurate translation, but people misunderstand it because they don't understand where it comes from. And people don't actually bother to look up and see how things work, but it happens. All right, so 1 Corinthians 9:22, fairly famous statement by Paul. He says, I have become all things to all people that, which translates hina, but all means I might, which is the subjunctive, save some. People look at that and they're thinking, Paul did this so that somebody might possibly get saved. That is not what Paul was saying. What he was saying is that he knew that by doing this, people would be saved. I did this so that this would happen. He was indicating his purpose. I did this for this reason. Not in the hopes of a possibility, but so that this would happen definitively. So the question becomes, why do we translate it with the word might in English?
We got it wrong.
We didn't get it wrong.
Oh, okay.
The problem is that most English translations, almost all English translations, are actually a lot more traditional than people think they are. People think, well, my translation doesn't have these and thous in it, so it's modern, it's hip, it's good to go, right? No. In fact, the vast majority of the things that you see translated in any English translation are going to actually be very, very, very traditional. Bible translators tend to be very conservative in how they do things. They don't want to change how they translate things unless they absolutely feel like they have to, or if they're trying to get published. That's another story. But they're usually going to keep things the same way it's been before if that's what people are used to. And in English, the word might normally nowadays means possibility. I might go to the store, possibly, But in the early forms of English, when the Bible was first being translated into English, might had multiple meanings. It could mean possibility, but it could also indicate purpose. For example, you look at some of the older American newspaper clippings, and they'll talk about the president vetoed this bill that he might please his constituents. It's not saying that he was hoping that this would please his constituents. It's saying he knew what would please his constituents, and he did that. This was a definite, purposeful, intentional thing. It's not in the hopes that they would be pleased. He knew that they would please, and he acted according to that purpose.
I mean, I've used that word before, meaning that I definitely would, and I confuse my kids when I say it, actually. I mean, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying.
And it's one of those things. Bible translators tend to be very conservative. They are used to pretty much automatically translating a subjunctive with might. It's just the way that we do it. But grammatically, since there's a hina out in front, it doesn't mean possibility, it means purpose.
So basically when you say so that, I got a job so that I might buy groceries.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm doing it for this purpose. Not in the possibility that I might get groceries. It's no, I need this, and I'm going to do this. This is not an option.
I mean, yeah, it does sound like a silly way to say it, but it makes sense.
Yeah, and it is proper English. When translations put the might in there, it is entirely proper. The only problem is that people come along, they don't know where anything comes from, and they always want to interpret things basically in terms of their own lens. And the people will say, Paul did this just in the hopes that something good would happen. Paul didn't really know, but he took a shot, and so you should take a shot too. That's not what this is talking about.
So why wouldn't they translate it to make it? Or do some translations?
Very few do,
Change it.
and that has a lot to do with just the tradition of the Bible. People are not comfortable with buying translations of the Bible that don't sound like what they're used to.
Right.
A lot of it has to do with sales. There's certain things that you can change and you can get your translation sold. There's certain things that you cannot change, and you won't get it sold if you make those changes.
Tell me your feelings on the Message Bible.
I hate
I
it.
discuss this. Okay.
Disgusting.
So
well,
conversational and
yeah.
It is.
Worse than that.
So
It's not even a translation. It is full on paraphrase.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering. I mean, because it's a Bible that's really out there that people really use. As a matter of fact, I have one and I read all the way through
I got
it.
one too.
But sometimes I found myself reading something and then going, okay, hold on, let me look that up.
Exactly.
Because I want to make sure I know what that means because it sounded really modern and really
Yeah, and there are places in it where it's okay.
fluffy, I guess.
Yeah, no, there's places in it where it is okay. But me, even though, you know, when they use might instead of would, which would be a whole lot clearer and things like that, I still prefer a more traditional translation because I know why they're doing it the way that they're doing
But
it.
for someone who doesn't,
Then it's going to be a problem. But this is, again, where we've talked about before, where the church actually used to tell people this from the pulpit. Okay, this is what this means here. This is how we understand this word here. And all those kinds of things, but they don't do that as much
people
anymore.
just don't question or look into things anymore.
Yeah.
They accept
Instead, they get their own little idea of, well, it says might, so it means possibility, and go off with that.
That's why I enjoy having so many different
translation of
translations.
things.
Yeah, having multiple translations helps.
It does for me, and it helps me to understand the
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, as long as the translations aren't too liberal or too formal in the way that they take things across.
I see some here and on there, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And I find myself more and more going to the King James for that. I mean, it's just me, but
Yeah, and the King James actually is a really decent translation. People know that I advocate a lot of the more modern ones, but it's not like the KJV was bad.
no, I'm not saying that. I just,
Sometimes I read the King James and then I want to read it in another version too, so that I can understand
I
it
know what I read.
differently.
Yeah, my beef with the KJV is usually on textual grounds, you know, like, because I know that the manuscripts that they come from, sometimes they left off things like that final sigma, which is kind of important. There's a big difference in meaning and stuff like that. And because of that, I don't always like the KJV. But as far as the actual translation itself, it's actually not bad. For its time especially, it was an awesome translation. Really good stuff. Yeah, the KJV is a good translation. As far as old translations are concerned, KJV was good, Geneva was good. The Matthew's Bible was actually a surprisingly good translation, even though it was one of the first ones. It was a really good English translation.
Matthew's,
It's hard to read for a modern person, though, because
it's in the old script.
it's got a Gothic font. It's great.
Yes, it's got a very Gothic
Written in pirate.
Was that the one you talked about?
No, he likes his Geneva.
And yeah, I wish they would put it in a modern script because I would love to read it and read that a little more.
That would be nice to find, but I haven't found too many like that.
All right, John.
I know.
Challenge accepted.
I don't want to have to go through and transcribe everything. That's a pain. All right, and then the reason why I put in Jim Elliot here. Does anyone know who Jim Elliot was?
He's a guy.
This is true. You're not wrong. Of course, these days you have to be careful about assuming that Jim is a guy, but yeah. Anyone? Yeah, anyone remember at all?
All creatures great and small. Is he the author?
Jim Elliot was a missionary to Ecuador.
Okay.
And
I was going to say that.
yeah, and he frankly devoted his life to being a missionary, but there was one particular people group towards the end of his life that he was trying to reach, and he never wound up reaching them because they killed him.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
Tip of the spear.
Yeah,
Ecuador?
this was in Ecuador.
Yeah. Tip of the spear. The story.
Yeah. Yeah, they killed him beforehand, and people looked at that and they say, you know, he did this, and you know, he didn't really know if it was going to work out or not, but he still did it and tried. That's not the philosophy that Christian missionaries have actually had historically. They have the same mentality as Paul. Paul said, I became all things to all people that I might win some. And he's not saying the possibility that they're going to be saved. He says, if I do everything that God has asked me to do, I know that God will use it. And that's the same attitude that Jim Elliot went into it with. I know that God will use it. And guess what? That people group, he didn't save them. No, they killed him. But through what he did, they did wind up getting saved, a good many of them. It did bear fruit. And this is the attitude that Christian missionaries have. We know that God fulfills his promises. We know that he keeps and does what he says he's going to do. And they go out in confidence in that, not the possibility of that. God will use his people, not might.
True. That's true.
Yeah, but that's neither here nor there. All right, synonym example. The mountain was big versus the mountain was large. There's no significant difference between these two statements.
No.
Now, there might be different people who would say it. You know, you might expect the mountain was big to be something that a kid would say.
Right.
What kind of a mountain did you go to? A big one. You know, large might be something that a little bit more adult person would say. But it still essentially means the same thing. And the same thing happens in Koine Greek, where two words will be used in the Koine Greek that mean essentially the same thing, and then the translator has a bit of a dilemma that they have to come up with. If these two words mean essentially the same thing, and I don't have English words that are close to the same meaning, what am I going to do? Am I going to create a whole new definition for something that's actually about the same, or am I just going to use the same word to translate in each case? Well, here's a famous example. In John 21:16, it says, he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And there, the word behind love is agapos. And then Peter responds, he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And there, the word for love is philo. He said to him, tend my sheep. Two different words in Greek, but they get translated as the same word. Why? Because they're synonyms. We don't have English words that would be close enough in meaning to capture the fact that these words are synonyms. There is no significant difference between these words. And because of that, they get translated the exact same way. However, there is a great many sermons that have been preached on John 21 and the reinstatement of Peter where they try to draw a difference between agapao and phileo, which does not actually exist in the Greek language. They're synonyms, but they'll try to preach on the difference between the two.
I've actually heard a sermon on exactly what you just said.
Yep, there are many of them that are out there. And it's usually by very sincere people. The people look at the text and they say, well, these are two different words. It doesn't come across in translation that way. I need to let people know. And they go through and they try to search through all the differences, but the fact of the matter is they're synonyms.
Say those words again for me.
Just
the two love words.
Well, there's the inflected forms and then there's the original forms. This one is agapos. This one is philo. And then the base forms are agapao and then phileo.
So that letter, do we have that letter?
Which one?
The first one that looks like a P with a backwards loop on it.
That's,
This one?
Yeah.
That's phi.
That's-
You guys have it. It's just a stylized form of it.
Okay, because I didn't make mine.
oh, it's the O with the line through it.
Yep.
Okay.
The vertical line through
I
it,
did
yeah.
it the wrong way then. I was doing the,
Because it looks like the W with the middle line come over and gone down. That's what that looks
Yeah.
like.
And this is something that you'll come across with different fonts for Greek. They sometimes like to stylize things.
All right.
well, you unstylize it because we only know it one way.
That's right.
Fee.
Yeah, I thought it was C.
Yeah, I thought it was the C too.
Yeah, it is phi.
It's B, okay.
Yep, phi.
Do you know how I know the PC? How to make the PC?
How?
Poseidon's Triton.
Yes.
Poseidon's trident looks like this, okay.
That's what it looks like.
Hey, if it works, it works.
Yay.
I have my ways of remembering some of them too. It's funny how your brain does that.
Yeah. Now, this is a question that still comes up that you guys will want to know. How do I know when two words are synonyms and when I should draw attention to a difference? It's good to know. And the basic rule is this. If the original speakers, the actual people that you're translating, if they drew attention to the difference, then you should. If they don't draw any attention to the difference, you don't either. That's the basic way to go with synonyms.
So in this case, there's no attention drawn. It says love. It says love.
Yeah, they didn't. It's not like Jesus stopped Peter and said, "You're using the wrong word, Peter."
Yeah.
He didn't. There wasn't anything that happened that way.
Right.
Instead, they just go on with their conversation. There's no stopping. There's no drawing attention to the words. Well, you use this word, but I use this word, and this, that, the other. There is no attention that's drawn to the difference. They just use different words. And because of that, they're being used synonymously. And so you translate them as synonyms. You translate them the same. Now, sometimes you'll find out in English, you can have two words in English. They'll be pretty close, but still a little bit different. And you might do a translation that way. But a lot of times, we can't make the same fine distinction that they would have, so we just translate it with the same word if they're synonyms.
So do some people try to make those different?
Yes, there's lots of sermons that have been preached where they try to bring a lot of attention to the differences, but they're really not different. They mean essentially the same thing in this context. So you look up the words, and if the meanings look like they overlap, and the original speakers aren't drawing any attention to a difference, they're meant to overlap. So that's why in every translation of the Bible, they will use love here in both cases, even though it's two different words.
Okay.
That's good translation.
Because
they are not messing it up.
It just
That would be like saying big and large.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's one nuance of love versus another nuance of love. It still means essentially the same thing.
Large look physically different, but they mean the same thing.
Exactly.
Just like these look physically different, but they mean the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But you'll get people who look at it and they say, well, it's two different words. It must mean two completely different things. No, it doesn't. No, they overlap. They didn't draw any attention to the difference. It's just fine. The translation that you'll have in most English translations is perfectly fine, perfectly valid. Which is one of the things that disappoint people when they take this course. It's like, I want to figure out everywhere that they got it wrong. Well, no, they usually really didn't get it wrong. There's a reason for it, but they're usually just fine. There's a reason why they translated as love there. Yes, they use the word might, and it is a little misleading, but there's a reason for it. There's a reason for all of them. It's not like they got it wrong. They know what they're doing. Now, some of my professors I've had in the past, I wonder about them, but that's another story. All right, general guidelines. The Bible's language is normal language used to convey specific messages through an understanding of the whole passage. It is not technical language meant to convey specific messages in isolation from each other. Like we said before, context is another way of saying it, but it's context. And this is normal, everyday language that the biblical authors wrote in. They didn't mean for people to turn their writings into technical papers. Everyday, normal speech, you interpret it like you would interpret everyday, normal speech. Also, each author's text was meant to be understandable in itself to an audience that generally only had the Old Testament and an oral presentation of the gospel. The author's audiences generally did not have all the books of the New Testament, which means that the book itself is where you want to spend the most time, either when you're translating or when you're just trying to understand a book. If the only way that you know to understand Matthew is by jumping around to Genesis and then over to Revelation and then over to Mark, you're not doing it the way that the biblical authors intended, because the biblical authors didn't do it with an awareness of the book of Revelation. It hadn't even been written yet, or 1 Corinthians, or all these other things.
Yes.
They basically said, to a person who has an understanding in the Old Testament, this is going to be understandable by itself. So the greatest commentary on the book of Matthew is the book of Matthew. The greatest commentary on the book of Romans is Romans. If you spend more time outside than inside of those books when you're trying to understand them, you are wrong.
Now, what I like to do, and this is just me, I like confirmation. Just, that I believe the Bible is not confusing. God is not the God of confusion. And I like to confirm some of their writings through other writings, maybe before or after them, whatever. It's just me. I just enjoy doing that. And I don't know that I'm wrong in doing it,
Just when I think what he's saying is when they wrote it, they
right,
didn't
well, I
have all those
understand
other
that. Yeah, right, I understand
They
that.
just had what they
Yeah,
were
when they
doing.
wrote it, I
That's
understand
it.
what they're saying, but I just like to look for more confirmation. It's just more for me.
And I understand where you're coming from, and your viewpoint is very current, very modern. However, Protestants historically rejected that way of interpreting the Bible. They understood that the Bible was written with specific intention in each book, and if you bounced around all over the place, they would accuse you of misinterpretation.
You're missing the point.
You're going to wind up abusing things, because they were used to dealing with the Catholics early on. That's who we separated from to become Protestants. That's who we were protesting. And the Catholics, they were really good at spinning a yarn. Here's this passage over here, and if I take this passage over here and if I interpret this other passage in light of that one, I can make it say anything I want to. And the Protestants said, no, we're not going to do that. If you want to understand what the passage means, you read the passage for itself, by itself. You understand what it means in and of itself first, and then you can systematize with other things else, but you don't ever use another passage to reinterpret another passage.
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm doing it just, to me, it's just more confirmation that the Bible is exactly what it is.
Yeah, for the early Protestants, if you started jumping around when you were preaching, it was a really good way to lose your job as a preacher. If you couldn't stay in Romans chapter 1 when you said you were going to preach in Romans chapter 1, you were fired. Yeah. Quick way to lose a job. You didn't do that.
Because you'll find in one passage, in one book, Paul says, do something. And then you find in another passage, he says, don't do something. And so people think, oh, well, Mormons do this. They're like, oh, look, he contradicted himself.
No.
It's like, no, he didn't.
not, no.
Stay in that book, and what was his intention for that book?
Right.
Yeah, the primary meaning is always found within the work itself,
I agree.
not in other places.
I agree with that.
All right, then universal words hardly ever have a truly universal meaning in normal speech or writing. We've already discussed that. And then D, no word definitively means anything by itself. Meaning is determined by analysis of the word's context, and context.
Yes, context is important.
Yeah, just a little. All right, and that is the end of what I have for you guys. I'm sorry that I went over time. I apologize for that.
We didn't start till late.
Yeah, we got started a little late. But yeah, hopefully it worked out for you guys. Go ahead and do the rest of the homework assignment. That'll be problems 6 through 10 and 18 and 20, so you'll have a little bit of reading on this one. And then next week, hopefully we will be able to get started on nouns and the definite article.
Okay.